Okay, here we go. Number 1. The Tsunami Stones of Aniyoshi, Japan. The year is 1933. You are standing on a hillside above the Iwate coast and everything below you is gone. The village, the boats, the fishing sheds, the paths you walked since childhood. The wave came in the night, and by morning the lower half of the world had been replaced by silence and debris. Your hands are still shaking. You are one of the ones who made it to high ground in time, and you are already asking yourself the only question that matters. How do you make sure this never happens to the people who come after you? Not your children, who will remember. Not your grandchildren, who will be told. The people after them, the ones who will know nothing except what you leave in the stone. You pick up a chisel. The inscription you carve will stand on this hillside for the next 90 years. High dwellings are the peace and harmony of our descendants. Remember the calamity of the great tsunamis. Do not build any homes below this point. Fumihiko Imamura, professor of disaster planning at Tohoku University, has spent his career studying what happens to warnings across time. His conclusion is precise and bleak. It takes about 3 generations for people to forget. Those who survive a disaster pass the knowledge to their children and their grandchildren. Then the memory fades. Then people build back down toward the water. There are hundreds of tsunami stones along the Japanese coastline. Some are more than 600 years old. They carry variations of the same instruction. Remember what the water did, and do not build below this line. In Aniyoshi, a village of roughly 11 households in Miyako City, the people obeyed. They built their homes uphill of the stone and kept them there through the post-war construction boom. Through every decade, when the rational short-term calculation said, come back down. On March 11, 2011, the Tohoku earthquake generated a tsunami that struck the northeastern coast with waves reaching 38 meters in some locations. It was the strongest earthquake ever recorded in Japan. More than 20,000 people died. In Aniyoshi, the water stopped approximately 300 feet below the stone. The village was untouched. Here is the part that does not resolve cleanly. The stone worked. The warning functioned exactly as the people who carved it intended, but it only worked in Aniyoshi. Neighboring communities had their own stones. Some had stones in better conditions, more legible, more prominently placed. The stones survived. The communities did not, because at some point in the preceding decades, the relationship between the stone and the people who lived near it had broken. The object persisted. The compliance did not. 2 things that look identical from the outside, a stone warning and a community that knows what the stone means, turned out to be completely different things. What Imamura's 3-generation finding actually describes is not the failure of stone as a medium. It is the decay of a relationship that has to be continuously rebuilt between the living and the object the dead left them. The stone does not warn. The stone plus the community's active memory of what the stone means warns. Remove the memory and the stone is just a rock with old writing on it. What did the people of Aniyoshi do differently, across 6 or more generations, to keep that relationship intact? What made compliance survive in one village while the same object in another village became invisible? And if warning requires active maintenance of meaning across every generation, what happens to a warning that needs to hold not for a century but for 100 centuries? That question is being worked on right now in a desert in New Mexico by engineers who have been studying these stones. We will get there. They are not the first people to ask what it means to record something for a reader who does not yet exist. Number 2, the Bai Heliang inscriptions, Yangtze River, China. The year is 763 AD. You are a local official in the fueling district, and the river is low. The White Crane Ridge, a natural stone shelf measuring 1,600 meters long and 15 meters wide, sits exposed in the middle of the Yangtze. It will be underwater again in a few months. You have come down to the ridge not because anyone has told you to, but because of something the previous official told you before he left his post. The fish carved into the rock at this location marks a water level, and if you record what you see today, someone after you might find it useful. You crouch in the cold, the stone wet under your knees, and you pick up your chisel. You do not know who you are writing for. Jiang Rui, director of the Bai Heliang Underwater Museum in Chongqing, has described the Bai Heliang inscriptions as unique because the data is complete and uninterrupted. The ridge carries 165 inscriptions spanning from the Tang Dynasty in 763 AD to the early years of this century. 72 separate low-water events are recorded. 18 stonefish are carved into the rock. The eye of one of those fish corresponds precisely to the average minimum water level of the Yangtze's middle and upper stream, accurate enough that modern engineers reference the data when designing the Gejuba hydropower station in the 20th century. The ridge is now 40 meters below the surface of the Yangtze, submerged permanently after the Three Gorges Dam. In 2009, engineer Gei Xiurun of the Chinese Academy of Sciences completed an underwater preservation cabin, a pressurized structure, resembling an immovable submarine, to protect the inscriptions in place on the riverbed. Visitors descend 91 meters by escalator and view the carvings through 23 observation windows. Here is what makes this ridge a problem for any simple account of how knowledge gets transmitted. No central institution ordered the maintenance of this dataset. No dynasty decree mandated that local officials continue carving. The Tang dynasty gave way to the 5 dynasties, then the Song, the Yuan, the Ming, the Qing, and finally the Republic. The political authority changed completely 7 times. The ridge kept receiving inscriptions. Different hands, different centuries, different rulers, same ridge, same fish, same intent. Something transmitted across those transitions that was not a law and was not a religious obligation. It was a shared understanding that the record mattered to people who did not yet exist. Did the people who carved these inscriptions understand that they were building a dataset for an unknown future? The Tang official who started it was recording something he observed. The Ming official who added to it was also doing that. But somewhere in that 1200-year sequence, the act of carving became something larger than observation. It became deliberate transmission, information addressed not to a contemporary but to a stranger in time. Who decides to build something for people they will never meet? Why maintain a record through dynastic collapse, war, and displacement? And what does it mean that the most durable repository of hydrological data ever produced was not a government archive, but a stone ridge that strangers kept choosing to add to, for no reason except that it seemed important to tell the future? The Babylonian carvers were recording facts. The people we look at next were carving something else entirely into stone. Not data, a threat. Number 3, the Kuduru of ancient Mesopotamia, Nippur, modern Iraq. The year is approximately 1100 BC. You are a stone carver in Nippur, and the block in front of you is black limestone, already shaped and smoothed on 4 sides. Your instructions are specific. On the top face, carved in register, the symbols of the gods who will witness this agreement: the lunar disk, the solar disk, the 8-pointed star. On the lower faces, the cuneiform text, the terms of the land grant, the names of the parties, the boundaries of the property, and then at the end, the section you carve most carefully, the curse. Every deity whose symbol appears on this stone is called by name to act against any person who moves this boundary, who erases this inscription, or who disputes this grant. Illness, blindness, destruction of the violator's family and name from history. You smooth the final lines. An undulating serpent frames the whole composition. The stone will be placed in a temple where both worshippers and the gods depicted on it can see it. A clay copy will go to the landowner. You have just built a warning that carries its own enforcement mechanism. Suzanne Paulus of the University of Chicago has analyzed the Kuduru tradition in detail. These boundary stones emerged under the Kassite dynasty in the 16th century BC and continued through the 12th century. Approximately 200 examples survive. Each one combines legal documentation, divine iconography, and what Paulus identifies as a curse mechanism that distinguishes Kuduru from all other Babylonian legal documents. Standard clay contracts use promissory oaths. Kuduru used divine curses. The distinction matters. An oath is a promise made by a person. A curse is a consequence embedded in an object. The difference is that a curse does not require anyone to enforce it. It claims to enforce itself. Here is where the concept shifts in a way that matters for everything that comes later. The Anayoshi stone carried information. The Babylonian inscriptions carried data. The Kuduru carries something different, a threat. Not a description of what will happen naturally, not a record for the future, but a deliberately constructed consequence for a specific prohibited behavior. The people who made this object understood that information alone does not reliably change behavior. They added an enforcement mechanism. Whether that mechanism worked because people genuinely feared divine punishment or because the fear of divine punishment was socially enforced is a question the stones cannot answer. Both explanations produce the same behavioral outcome. The Sandia National Laboratories panel that would convene nearly 3,000 years later to design warning markers for nuclear waste in New Mexico would reach an almost identical conceptual point. Information markers that describe the danger are insufficient if the reader can choose to disbelieve the description. A marker that produces an emotional response of menace, something that communicates danger not through language, but through the experience of encountering it, might perform more reliably across cultural change. The principle behind the kudurus, serpents, and divine symbols is not superstition. It is threat architecture, designed to function even when the specific theology behind it is no longer believed. When does information become threat, and when does that conversion make it more effective? What happens to a threat encoded in gods when those gods are no longer known? The Sandia panel asked the same question in 1993 and did not fully resolve it. Neither have we. There is one more thing a warning can do beyond inform and threaten. It can simply close the door. The next civilization on this list did exactly that, and nobody has ever convincingly explained why. Number 4, Göbekli Tepe, southeastern Turkey. The year is approximately 8000 BC. You are among the people who built this place, and you have decided that it is time to close it. The enclosures you have spent generations constructing, lifting limestone pillars that weigh between 7 and 10 tons, carving foxes, scorpions, vultures, and serpents into their faces with stone tools, arranging them in precise circular formations with taller central pillars that bear stylized arms and hands. You are going to fill all of it with earth, bone, and debris. Not because an enemy forced you, not because a disaster destroyed it, because you decided it was time. Klaus Schmidt of the German Archaeological Institute began excavating Göbekli Tepe in 1994 and worked the site until his death in 2014. The oldest structures date to approximately 9600 BC, confirmed by multiple independent radiocarbon analyses. That is 11,600 years ago, 7,000 years before the Great Pyramid, 6,000 years before Stonehenge. The site predates pottery and domesticated grain, and it sits in the precise region where the earliest evidence of wheat domestication has been found, raising the documented possibility that Göbekli Tepe was not built by farmers, but by the people who, organized around this structure, became farmers. Ground-penetrating radar surveys have identified at least 16 enclosures beneath the hillside. 4 have been excavated. Here is where the deliberate burial stops making sense by any ordinary explanation. Around 8000 BC, the builders filled the enclosures, systematically, comprehensively, with organized material including animal bones and debris. There is no destruction layer, no ash, no evidence of the kind of disruption that forces abandonment. The coverage is total, and the fill is arranged, which means the people doing this were following a plan, not fleeing. This was a decision made by people who were still capable of building more, who chose instead to cover what they had built and preserve it intact beneath the earth. 12 of the remaining enclosures have not been opened. The largest structure identified by radar has never been entered. Its internal pillar arrangement appears to differ from the 4 excavated enclosures. Whatever it contains has been sealed for 10,000 years and remains sealed today. The closure that happened in 8000 BC was not reversed when the technology to reverse it became available. It continues. What were they sealing it from? What return did they intend, or anticipate, or prepare for? The carved symbols that repeat across multiple enclosures in identical form suggest a sustained vocabulary, something that meant the same thing across generations of construction. If meaning was encoded in these stones, it is still there. Beneath 12 unopened enclosures in southeastern Turkey, waiting. They are not the only civilization that understood sealing. A place is itself a kind of message. The next site on this list was sealed without stones and without burial. It was sealed by the chemistry of the ground itself. Number 5, the Plutonian at Hierapolis, southwestern Turkey. The year is 2013. You are crouching near a fissure in the earth at the edge of an ancient temple precinct, and your head is going light. Not dramatically. Subtly, just enough to make you stand back up and reconsider where you are placing your body. The smell rising from the fissure is sulfurous and close. Birds near the opening have fallen. You have just watched a sparrow drop. Francesco de Andrea of the University of Salento had been searching for the Plutonian, the ancient gateway to the underworld at Hierapolis, for a decade before his team's measurements in 2013 confirmed it. Carbon dioxide is pooling at the fissure at 35% concentration at ground level. At standing height, the air is normal. 3 feet lower, it is lethal. The ancient sources were not mythologizing. Strabo, writing in the 1st century BC, described bulls collapsing at the threshold. Cassius Dio in the 3rd century AD described birds dropping in a mid-flight. Both accounts are precisely accurate descriptions of carbon dioxide behavior. The gas is heavier than air. It pools. It kills anything that breathes near the ground. Dead beetles, dead birds, dead insects were found at the chamber entrance in a band roughly 6 inches above the ground. The ancient threshold is still performing exactly as described 2,000 years ago. Here's the thing the ancient writers understood that we were too slow to take seriously. The priests of Cybele who served this site were celebrated across the Roman Empire for entering the killing fog and emerging alive. For centuries, this was treated as divine immunity. It was chemistry. A person standing upright breathes above the lethal concentration. The priest had learned this, almost certainly through the deaths of earlier priests who crouched at the wrong moment. What they built around that knowledge was a complete religious institution, a centuries-long performance of divine favor, constructed on an accurate understanding of gas physics that they had no vocabulary to describe. The knowledge was real. The explanation was the best available language for the time. The ancient sources described an invisible killer accurately for 2,000 years, transmitted the description intact through copy after copy, and the description waited in perfect condition for a modern instrument to confirm it. If that level of precision was applied to something as counterintuitive as a lethal gas, what else was documented with the same accuracy that we are still reading as metaphor? The Sandia panel faced the same problem in reverse. How do you warn about a danger that is invisible and will not manifest for a generation? The next place on this list was built by people who worked through a version of that problem in a material that no one expected and no one has fully explained. Number 6. The tunnel beneath Teotihuacan, Mexico. The year is 2003. You are a security guard and it has just rained very hard and a section of ground near the Pyramid of the Feathered Serpent has subsided. The hole is roughly 12 inches across. The smell rising from it is unlike the dry air above. Something down there is sealed. Sergio Gomez of Iena lowered a camera on a cable. The walls of the tunnel below were covered in pyrite, applied so densely and deliberately that they functioned as mirrors. In torchlight, a person standing in this tunnel would have seen their own reflection multiplied in every direction. The tunnel was built to simulate the cosmos from the inside. The tunnel runs 340 feet, sealed around 200 AD. 6 years of excavation produced 50,000 artifacts. Jade figurines, obsidian blades, rubber balls, jaguar and puma bones, carved shells, wooden boxes, and liquid mercury pooled in the chambers. There are no mercury deposits near Teotihuacan. Every drop was imported from a distant source, transported to this location, poured into a sealed tunnel, and left. The procurement represented a major organized expenditure of resources. Someone considered it essential. Here is the absence that sits at the center of 50,000 objects. No body was found. The tunnel was built for someone. The scale of the construction, the quality of the artifacts, the mirrors, the mercury, all of it points to a specific person of supreme importance who was supposed to end up here. They never arrived. The preparation exists without its intended subject. And the mercury sits in those chambers carrying an association that appears now for the first time in this list, but will not appear for the last time. The Mayan elite were buried with cinnabar, mercury sulfide. The builders of Teotihuacan pooled liquid mercury in their most important ritual space. 3 civilizations, no documented contact, same element, same association with the threshold between the living and the dead. Whether this represents independent convergence on the same chemistry or something more connected is unanswered. The innermost chamber requires special clearance. The analysis is not finished. Number 7. The Mausoleum of Qin Shi Huang, Shanxi Province, China. The year is 210 BC. Two farmers drilling a well near Shanxi in 1974 hit something hard at a depth that should not have had hard objects. What they found was the outer perimeter of an army. 8,000 individually distinct terracotta soldiers, 130 chariots, 520 horses, each face different, arranged in precise military formation across 3 underground pits. The terracotta army is extraordinary. It is also not the tomb. The tomb is the mound, a man-made hill 249 feet tall and nearly a mile in circumference. It has looked like a natural hill for 2,200 years. Sima Qian, writing in the 2nd century BC, described its interior with precision. Rivers of flowing mercury, a star field painted on the ceiling, triggered crossbow mechanisms. Soil analysis in 1981 found mercury concentrations 100 times higher than ambient levels in the surrounding Earth, distributed in a pattern consistent with engineered channels. The historian was accurate. Resistivity tomography surveys have since produced images of underground chambers consistent with a multi-room palace complex. The structure appears intact. Here is what the official explanation cannot close. The mercury at Teotihuacan was imported and placed in a sealed tunnel. The mercury here was engineered into rivers inside a sealed mound on the other side of the world, by a different civilization in a different century, with no documented connection to Mesoamerica. The association between mercury and the threshold between worlds appears twice on this list now, in both cases as a deliberate material choice by builders who sealed the space immediately after. The Chinese government has confirmed the underground palace. They have confirmed the mercury. They have confirmed the intact architecture. The mound has not been opened. The stated reason is preservation. Other Chinese imperial tombs have been excavated with modern techniques, among them the Han Dynasty complex at Mawangdui and multiple Tang period sites. The technology that would have justified the delay in 1974 is no longer the reason to delay. The mound remains closed. What the next entry asks is a different version of this question. What happens when an object survives completely intact, but the reason it was built does not survive at all? Number 8, the Shigir Idol, Ural Mountains, Russia. The year is 1890. Gold miners working a peat bog near Yekaterinburg pull fragments of ancient wood from the mire at a depth of approximately 4 meters. The peat has preserved the wood in conditions of acidity and anaerobic compression that prevented decomposition for longer than wood survives in almost any other environment on Earth. What the miners have found, assembled from fragments, is a figure carved from a single large trunk, originally approximately 5.3 meters tall, now displaying 2.8 meters of surviving surface, covered in geometric markings, zigzags, chevrons, repeated patterns, multiple stylized human faces. Thomas Terberger of the University of Göttingen and his colleagues published updated dating results in Quaternary International in 2021. The Shigir idol was carved approximately 12,500 years ago. That is at the end of the last ice age. It predates Stonehenge by more than 6,000 years. The geometric markings on its surface have been mapped in 3-dimensional detail using high-resolution scanning. The zigzag patterns appear to repeat in a structured sequence across multiple faces. No interpretation of that sequence has achieved scholarly consensus. The meaning is gone. Here is the failure mode in its clearest form. The object achieved exactly what it was built to achieve. It survived. The peat preserved it across 12.5 millennia. The larch is intact. The carvings are intact. The faces are intact. And we cannot read a single mark on it. This is the precise nightmare scenario that the Sandia National Laboratories panel would identify in 1993 when designing warning markers for nuclear waste. The possibility that a warning could survive 10,000 years in perfect physical condition and be encountered by a future civilization that has no framework for understanding what it means. The Shigir idol is not a warning, but it is the proof of concept for the failure mode. It is what a survived but unreadable message looks like. The people who built the next site on this list left no inscription at all. What they left was the landscape itself, transformed at a scale that cannot be ignored, by people who had no writing, no metal, and no reason we have yet identified to do it. Number 9. Poverty Point, Louisiana. The year is 1700 BC. You and several thousand other people have been moving earth by basket for what has now been years. No wheels, no draft animals, no pottery even. Basket by basket, 50 pounds at a time, you are building 6 concentric semi-elliptical ridges, and 5 earthen mounds on a bend of a former Mississippi River channel in what will eventually be northeastern Louisiana. The largest mound, Mound A, rises 22 meters above the surrounding landscape and covers 50,000 square meters at its base. The entire project will move 750,000 cubic meters of soil, all of it carried by people. T.R. Kidder of Washington University in St. Louis has documented that Poverty Point's builders were hunter-gatherers, not farmers, not a complex agricultural state with surplus labor. People who hunted, fished, and gathered with no written language, no metal tools, and no domesticated animals for hauling, who organize the sustained communal labor required to reshape 900 acres of landscape into an unmistakably artificial geometry over approximately 600 years. The site contains no human remains. It was built at the scale of a burial complex. It contains no burials, no bones, no funerary objects, no evidence of an interment anywhere across 900 acres of deliberate construction. The purpose remains unresolved. Here is what connects this mound complex to a classified government report written 3,000 years later. Sandia National Laboratories, designing nuclear waste warning markers in 1993, proposed a system of monumental earthworks, enormous artificial landscape features designed to communicate danger through scale and deliberate geometry, readable as significant even by a civilization that shared no language, no cultural memory, and no institutional continuity with the builders. Poverty Point is 3,000 years old. The Sandia proposal is 30 years old. The underlying logic appears to be the same. A landscape transforms so completely and at such scale that it cannot be mistaken for nature communicates something without words to anyone who encounters it. Whether the builders of Poverty Point and the engineers at Sandia arrived at this logic independently, or whether the logic itself is simply the only solution that survives every other failure mode, is the question that connects this entry to the next one. Number 10, the Waste Isolation Pilot Plant, Carlsbad, New Mexico. The year is 1993. You are an engineer in a conference room in Albuquerque with a whiteboard covered in drawings that would look to most observers like hostile art. Spike fields, jagged concrete forms rising from the earth at irregular angles, earthworks designed not to welcome but to repel, to communicate menace before language is engaged, to make a person's body register danger before their mind processes a single word. You are designing a warning marker for a facility that buries transuranic nuclear waste 2,150 feet underground in an ancient salt formation 26 miles southeast of Carlsbad. The waste will remain dangerous for 10,000 years. Your job is to warn people who live 10,000 years from now to stay away from this specific location, knowing that in 10,000 years, no currently living language may survive, no current cultural institution may persist, and no one may know this facility ever existed. The 1993 Sandia National Laboratories report, SAND 92 11382, authored by Kathleen M. Trouth, Stephen C. Hora, and Robert V. Guzowski, documents the panel's full assessment. The Human Interference Task Force, convened by the United States Department of Energy in 1981, had established the framework. The panel included anthropologists, archaeologists, linguists, astronomers, and engineers. Their proposals range from menacing earthworks to pictographic warning systems to multilingual inscriptions to the atomic priesthood concept, a suggestion by semiotician Thomas Sebeok that a self-perpetuating group of scientists function as a kind of secular priesthood, maintaining and transmitting knowledge of the site through ritual and institution across centuries. The proposed warning text reads, "This place is not a place of honor. No highly esteemed deed is commemorated here. Nothing valued is here. What is here was dangerous and repulsive to us. The danger is still present in your time as it was in ours." Here is where the preceding 9 entries stop being separate stories. Every problem the Sandia panel encountered in 1993 appears somewhere in that sequence. The Anayoshi stones solved one piece. Information physically embedded in landscape, positioned where it cannot be ignored. But the stones required active community memory to function, and Imamura's 3-generation finding tells us that memory fails on precisely the timescale the WIPP site needs it to hold. The Baiheliang inscription solved another piece. a record maintained across dynastic collapse without centralized enforcement, through nothing more than a shared understanding that the record mattered. But the Shigir idol demonstrates the failure condition. The object can survive and the meaning can disappear completely, and you cannot tell from the outside which is happening. The Kuduru added threat architecture to information, an enforcement mechanism that does not depend on institutional memory to activate. The Sandia panel proposed something similar in their menacing earthwork concepts. Make the approach feel dangerous before the visitor decides to test it. Göbekli Tepe shows that deliberate closure is itself a transmissible message, that sealing something communicates to the future that the sealed thing matters. Poverty Point shows that landscape-scale geometry can function as an unmistakably artificial signal even without language, which is why the Sandia panel's earthwork proposals look the way they do. What the panel could not fully resolve, and what remains unresolved today, is a Shigir problem. You can build the object, you can make it survive. You cannot guarantee that the people who find it will know what it means. The idol has been in a museum in Yekaterinburg for over a century. We have subjected it to radiocarbon dating, three-dimensional scanning, and multispectral imaging. We still cannot read it. The facility at Carlsbad is real. The waste is there. The markers are being designed. We are the ancient civilization now, building warnings for people we will never meet, in a language we cannot know will survive, about a danger we are certain is still present in their time as it is in ours. What every culture on this list understood, and what the Sandia panel is still working to encode, is this: meaning does not preserve itself. Information survives only when the relationship between the object and the reader is continuously rebuilt, generation by generation, until the last generation that needs to be warned has passed. Every civilization on this list tried to solve some part of that problem. None of them knew whether they succeeded, neither do we. If you want to keep finding out, subscribe.